everyone. Thank you for coming to our PolyConnect lunch this week. We're honored today to have Justin Wick here. He's class of 2009 in the Navy, based out in Memphis, Tennessee. So he's here. He's traveled quite a way to come and meet with you guys. So he's going to talk to you about his career path and answer all your questions.
Actually, I forgot to include you. I brought this last time, but this is kind of just like a little bit of story.
Oh, awesome. Thank you so much. Everyone should be second session.
No problem.
Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you too.
Thank you.
Cool, so I'm Justin Newman, and I'm kind of the representative, and we kind of talked about my path through the nuclear Navy. So I graduated from Poly in 2009. I went to Duke University where I studied mechanical engineering. While at Duke, at Poly, I was a Poly ambassador. I played water polo, swam here. Over at Duke, I kind of continued to do tours and help with the admissions office over at the engineering school over there specifically. I played club water polo at Duke and then did naval ROTC, which kind of got me into the Navy pipeline. Right? So once I graduated from Duke with that mechanical engineering background, I went to my first ship, the USS Gary, where I was the anti-submarine warfare officer. So I was in charge of about anywhere 12 to 19 sonar technicians and all of our active and passive sonar arrays, where we were supposed to be able to track submarines while they're under the water. I say supposed to because our deployment that we did was actually down south off of Panama and Ecuador, where we did counter-drug operations. Not a whole lot of submarines down there, so not a lot to track and stuff. But we were able to catch about 15 or so drug smugglers and their cargo for a total of about 15 tons of cocaine and a little bit of marijuana. But 15 tons of cocaine is a lot of money. That's like 100% pure. It's interesting to see when you pull a bale of cocaine that's about 55 kilos, you're just holding like millions of dollars worth of contraband. But so I did that for a couple years, and I decommissioned the USS Gary. So we were the last frigate in the Pacific Fleet. The Gary is actually now, we sold it. It's a ship in the Taiwanese Navy. But after that, so kind of, I am a nuclear officer, right? So every nuclear officer goes to training over in Charleston, South Carolina, 6 months of nuclear power school, which is, they give you the baseline theory for everything that you need to know to operate a nuclear reactor. So it starts with reactor plant systems, a little bit of math, a little bit of physics, then we get into heat transfer, thermo, fluid flow, chemistry, material science, radiological fundamentals, electrical engineering, aspects of reactor plant operations, core characteristics. I'm missing some stuff there. But basically, it's all the theory for, hey, this is how our reactor works. If this changes, this parameter changes, or this piece of equipment breaks or stops working, or if we change this, that, whatever, why does the reactor plant react the way it does, and so that we know what to expect when something abnormal happens, right? That training is really important for the nuclear Navy specifically because we have been around since 1965 without any nuclear accidents. So the nuclear Navy is the longest running nuclear organization as a whole that has never had any issues, right? The Army had a nuclear power program. The Air Force had a nuclear power program. They both had issues. They don't have nuclear power programs anymore, right? Our safety record is what keeps us able to run all of our submarines and all of our aircraft carriers on nuclear power. For example, in Fukushima, over in Japan, when they had their reactor accident, the aircraft carrier that I was on, the USS Ronald Reagan, as well as the USS Abraham Lincoln, Each aircraft carrier has about 5,000 people on board. 450 of those people are in reactor department alone. So we have the most, the highest number of and largest concentration of contamination workers and radiological workers that are trained up. So we flew a lot of our personnel out there to help them with their contamination efforts and containment efforts. But since then, Japan has shut down every single nuclear reactor that they have in the country. We parked 2 nuclear reactors about an hour and a half away from Tokyo, and they're okay with that because of the track record, that safety track record that we have. So it's really important for the Navy as a whole that we make the safest operators, the safest nuclear operators that are out there. Part of that is the knowledge, part of that is that training. Right? So that 6 months of training that I did down in Charleston, then it's 6 months of hands-on training up in Boston Spa, New York. So there are 2 prototype reactors up in New York that all the people in New York don't really care about too because they know we've never had an issue. But every single nuclear operator that's officers and enlisted goes up there or stays down in Charleston to do the exact same thing and learn how to operate a reactor in a training environment before they ever get to their first ship. So that's 6 months where I learned how to operate the SAG reactor plant that's up there. After that, like I said, I went to the USS Ronald Reagan, where I was the reactor mechanical division officer. I was in charge of anywhere from 35 to 95 nuclear trained mechanics, and every single piece of equipment that touched the primary plant. So everything where reactor coolant would go and touch, I owned all of that equipment. So billions of dollars worth of equipment. The thing that I do now is actually, so when I was on the Reagan, I lived for 2 years out in Japan. Now I've recently moved over to Memphis, Tennessee, where I do nuclear officer recruiting specifically, right? So we have a very different set, a much higher threshold that we are looking for people to join as nuclear officers. And part of that is because of that safety track record that we need to maintain. I think one of the things that I talk about a lot to some of the college students that I go and talk to in my recruiting efforts is, look, I went to Duke University, mechanical engineering. A lot of my friends are engineers, you know, really smart people, definitely smarter than me. And they went off to do kind of all those things you guys hear about. They went off to do consulting, they went off to do engineering jobs, they went off to do investment banking or venture capitalism, all those things where they're like, yeah, I'm gonna make a ton of money and all that stuff. And they're doing great, and it's awesome. Like I said, they're way smarter than I am. You know, when I left my carrier, I was 28 years old, right? At 28 years old, all of those people that I just talked about, all my really smart friends who are doing well out in industry, you know, some of them are in charge of teams. And that's awesome, right? At most, one of my friends, she's in charge of 5 people on her team, right? At 28 years old, I was in charge of 95 people and a 550 megawatt reactor plant, right? So that's an experience that I have that, you know, blows a lot of these other people out of the water. At 22 years old, when I graduated from Duke and I showed up at my first ship, the USS Gary, I showed up, my very first day, they said, hey, here's your division, here's 12 people, you're senior chief, you have an inspection next week, better figure it out pretty quick. You know, so it's a very different experience from some of the other things, and I've really learned a lot from that. You know, sometimes the job is hard, it's challenging, but it's really fulfilling, and the experience I've had has been really awesome. So realistically, I don't want to like chat for too long. I've got some stock pictures, some pictures that I have from different exercises and stuff that I've done. I don't really have a lot of pictures from the carrier because a lot of that where I worked is classified, so I can't take pictures down there. But it's kind of open to you guys and whatever questions about it. It doesn't have to be the Navy or my experience or my route through has been a little bit different than a lot of my other poly classmates. And I mean, a lot of my other poly classmates are doing really well too, so that kind of just opened it up to anybody.
Sure. So what inspired you to take up this route?
So the honest answer there is Top Gun. I'm a little bit too young to be considered, for the Navy to consider me a Top Gun recruit, but in second grade, I did a report that said when I grow up, I want to be a naval aviator. Since then, I kind of changed what I wanted to do in the Navy over the years, but I kind of always stuck with I want to be in the Navy. So when I went through my college counseling with Ms. Leon, one of the things that was important to me is I wanted to go to school with an ROTC unit so that I can continue that whole path to get into the Navy. So like I said, over the years I changed what I want to do, but being a nuclear officer is basically the most technically heavy job that you can have in the Navy. So it very much fit kind of what I was looking at studying. It's a good question though. It's not the most common answer, right? But no, I don't have any military family or anything like that. I saw Top Gun at 14, so it looked pretty cool. But that changed over the years. So, oh, go ahead.
Well, I have a question more about like sort of like institutionally. Obviously, you're not like infantry fighting in the Middle East, but you're participating in like the military as an institution. And there's been a lot of talk recently about like the degree to which America should participate in engagements overseas, just outside of the country. And so I was wondering, both personally and like in the people with whom you interact, like how politics are talked about, how like you sort of how leadership in like Washington D.C. is perceived, or like how it's treated, and that sort of thing.
I mean, that's a really good question. Realistically, politics in the Navy or in the military in general is a different animal, right? Technically, when I'm in uniform, I don't have a political stance because my ultimate boss is the President of the United States, right? And so there are different ways that we go through that, right? A lot of times, a lot of that high-level policy isn't making that much a difference in the missions that we do, right? I kind of have some quick pictures and stuff, but the Navy in general, especially as a surface warfare officer, we've got our main missions are going to be strike warfare, so that's dropping or shooting off missiles and stuff like that. We do anti-submarine warfare, anti-surface warfare, amphibious warfare, so dropping Marines off on the beach. A lot of times amphibious warfare also has a lot to do with humanitarian efforts, right? So Cuba, or I guess not Cuba, like Haiti gets hit with a hurricane and stuff, and they're out of power for a long time. Well, two 550 megawatt reactors can power a lot of homes. Our carrier makes its own water, makes its own energy, like all of that stuff, right? This is a little bit closer to like anti-piracy and the anti-drug operations that we do. For example, I talked about the carrier has 5,000 people on board, right? A big part of that group is also the medical complement that we have on board, right? The carrier, with the aircraft that they have, you drop a lot of supplies and a lot of medical help in terms of personnel, doctors. Every carrier is going to have multiple doctors, dentists, surgeon, an anesthesiologist, a physical therapist, counseling, and all that kind of stuff, right? That's kind of all I'll leave that. So we have a lot of missions, and it's kind of Mr. Feldman has. I took Mr. Feldman's ethics class, but he has a world something class. I forget.
Globalization is human rights.
Right. One of the things he talks about is two movies that came out right about the same time, and that talked about what was it, Somalia and what was the other country now? Interview with Sudan, right? 2 movies where one of them, there was the huge political atmosphere about it was like, why are we there, right? That was one of them. The other one was, why aren't we there, right? So it's kind of a little bit of, damn if you do, damn if you don't. But the thing is, from our standpoint is we have a mission to accomplish, right? So out being stationed in Japan, our mission is very much presence-wise, right? North Korea starts launching missiles over the mainland of Japan. We're going to go out there and say, hey, that's not a good idea. This is like, 100,000 tons of like American diplomacy off your coast, right? So, when a crisis happens, the Navy is kind of what we consider in some ways the away team, right? We are forward deployed in a lot of places, and we can be anywhere in force in significant numbers within less than 2 weeks, right? And if you think about what's the statistic, like 70% of the world's population is within 20 miles of the coast, right? We can be anywhere with whatever kind of help that we need, whether it's humanitarian assistance, whether it's a little bit of strong arming. We could be there as a away team that can keep the threat away from the homeland. Right? So a lot of the big policy type things, it takes a lot of inertia to change. Because the president says one thing today, it makes it really hard to shift a lot of we plan our operations years in advance, right? We do exercises with a lot of our allies down in Australia, Philippines, South Korea, what am I missing? Vietnam, Japan. We do Rim of the Pacific every other year. That has generally 30 plus countries come and play. To include Russia has come and played in that, and China has come and played in that exercise, right? So it takes a lot of inertia to kind of do a whole 180 in a lot of things. And our biggest mission, especially out in the Pacific, is a lot of what we call freedom of navigation, right? So China has been doing a lot of posturing in and around the Taiwanese Straits that sees a huge percentage of maritime shipping go through there, right? Same thing happens through the Gulf of Aden and the Red Sea, right? A ton of shipping goes through there and then goes through the Suez Canal. Well, if Iran decides that they want to harass a bunch of ships going through there, or China says that this open ocean is actually our territory, they want to harass a bunch of ships over there. We're trying to just not just for our flagships, just maritime trade. If you want your stuff from Amazon, you want the ships to be going through there, right? And so that's part of the big part of what we do out in the Pacific. I don't know if that answers your question. It's a little bit long-winded. It's a complicated thing to get around. The government's very much an animal, and you poke the animal, and it probably doesn't do much unless you hit it with a bat. Right? So it's hard to get some things done, and especially different. But we've had established missions and partnerships with a lot of countries out there. That was a little rhetoric heavy, but.
Any other questions?
Yeah, so being a nuclear officer and working in the anti-submarine warfare, was your job primarily listening for, I know that how it works. Were you in charge of listening for engine noises, sonar and stuff, or was it mostly what exactly did you do?
So I'll kind of split that up. As an anti-submarine warfare officer, our main tools are going to be active and passive sonar, right? So active sonar is kind of what you use in the movies, Sean Connery, one being the whole thing, right? But, which is great, and it works really well, but only at short distances, right? I guess no physics people in here right now, but, sound dissipates a lot quicker in water. It goes pretty far, but for a source, it dissipates pretty quickly too. So your active sonar is only good for certain ranges. Passive sonar, so that's basically just listening. Sound, while it dissipates, it also can travel pretty far, and especially at lower frequencies. So if I want to track a submarine from multiple miles away, I want to be listening only. Because you know what, you have machinery that's running, pumps that are running, air conditioning that's going in your submarine, and it's all of that somewhere is connected to the hull of your giant metal submarine. That metal submarine is going to vibrate a little bit. So those sounds are going to propagate through the water, and I can track passively at a much longer distance, right? And that's what we want, because if we can kind of pick them up on active sonar, they are way too close, and it's a little like too dangerous at that point already. So that's kind of the anti-submarine warfare side of the house. The nuclear side of the house, we primarily have two jobs, right? The first job is actually standing watch and running that reactor, right? So for a period of time, 3 to 8 or 12 or 24 hours, depends on what's going on. I am in the room making sure that everything is going smoothly, right? So the difference that we have on our reactor plants versus like a commercial plant is you go over here, you start up your power plant, and you bring it up to power. For the most part, your power demand's pretty constant, right? It might cycle a little bit as it gets later in the day or it gets hotter or whatever, but your power demand is pretty stable. Our power demand is very much dependent on how fast the ship wants to go, because our nuclear reactors power the ship in terms of electricity, but also the main part is propulsion, so turning the screw and turning the propeller. The electricity for the entire carrier takes up less than 10% of our power. That's 5,000 people's worth of lights on, charging their iPhones, and taking showers. It's less than 10% of our power. The rest of it is purely for propulsion. So what that means is if the ship wants to go, and the aircraft carrier, funnily enough, it's our largest ship, but it's also our fastest ship. If they want to go fast because they need to, shoot planes off the top, they need certain wind characteristics in order to launch planes, they will book it. And they call down to us and say, hey, I need, we're going to be going fast for this period of time. And we set up the parameters that it takes to make sure that it's okay, right? Because we could keep the reactor running at 100% all the time, but we're going to burn our fuel much faster. I mean, in some ways we aren't worried about fuel because we only need to refuel every 30 years, which is the advantage of nuclear power, right? We can outrun all of our escorts, but at the same time, the escorts are going to need to add gas, right? If they're trying to keep up with us at max speed, they're burning a ton of gas. But we want our ships to last 60 years. So to extend that time, we will only give the power that they need, but there's a lot of parameters that we need to change in order to do that. So that's our first part. The second part is a division officer kind of job, where I am in charge of the people, and they're doing their work, making sure the maintenance for all of our equipment is going on time and being performed properly. And so that's very different sides of the job.
Thank you.